Welcome back to the HIT podcast. My name is James Leighton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where I bring you real life stories from some of the most interesting leaders of our sector. We talk about the big challenges facing UK housing today. Today, I was delighted to be joined by Gerraint Oakley, Executive Director of Development and Growth at Platform Housing. We talk at length about his transition from private to public sector, what we can offer the next generation of talent in the market, how Platform have dealt with agile working and helping communities and colleagues work remotely, and some of the challenges of remote working and inducting colleagues. I hope you get loads of value from the episode, and if you do like the show, I would ask that you please like and subscribe. Gerraint, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James.
How are you?
I'm good, very good. Thanks, mate. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good. It's nice and rainy in Manchester today, so usual weather resumes. Where I like to start with these things every time really is just, do you mind just giving us a bit of an overview of your background and I suppose, you know, a little bit about the early years of your career?
Yeah, no problem. So after my A-levels, I actually joined the Air Force. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did like construction. I'd started sort of labouring as a very young man on construction sites. Did some service in the RAF in the 80s. I came out as part of my resettlement. I got onto a degree course doing building surveying. So I started out as a building surveyor. And then through the 90s, I was lucky enough to work on some great schemes. The Celtic Manor, I worked on as a site project manager for Penrith Centre Parks, living in a woodcutter's cottage for a year, hand setting out every building. I worked on prisons, hospitals, hotels, rail track. And then towards just the end of the 90s, I joined Vodafone, where I became eventually a global strategy manager in real estate. So I managed to work abroad. I worked in my main countries I worked in quite often were Spain, Portugal, Egypt, and Turkey. And built things like contact centers, radio networks, data centers. Fantastic career in Vodafone in itself. And then my timing was perfect. I joined Barratt Developments in early 2008 at the start of the previously unprecedented change in the housing sector. Yeah. Great time to learn about house building. Quite an interesting time, to say the least. And then when I was at Barratt, I started working on a major regeneration scheme in Hattersley, not too far from Manchester, actually. Right. And I started to work with housing associations, the HCA, started to see how complex housing associations are and the great work they do. And I transitioned into this sector, and I've been here ever since. And I joined Platform 1 year and 1 month ago today.
Amazing. Thanks for that. I mean, it'd be remiss of me not to ask, you know, talk to me about the military. So how long were you there? Where were you based? What did you...
Only 3 years. It was great, but I was attached to the helicopter squadrons out of RAF Odeon, the Chinooks and Pumas. I was a combat dispatch rider. I rode off 3 motorbikes, but basically boys' own stuff, jumping out of helicopters, going on exercise, playing war. And it was also, in those days, it was the biggest threat was the Cold War Russian threat. And obviously at the end of the 90s, sort of the Cold War fell away, and then we were offered PBR's early release, which was, you know, I took it up and never looked back. As I said, I started out as a building surveyor did day release. I got a job tracing. My first job in this industry was tracing other people's drawings.
Really?
It was cheaper than a photocopier. That's what I was doing when I started out in this. And then I did day release to do my degree in building surveying. So that's where it all started. Anyway.
Amazing. And how did you find the transition from sort of the military into, you know, civil life as it is? I did a small stint. I did a year in the army when I was younger, and I think it set me up quite well, especially from a work ethic perspective and discipline and stuff. But what sort of, how was the transition for you?
I was pretty good with it, I think. Interestingly, again, another weird quip. I used to work in a pub called the Dirty Duck, serving beer at the age of 14 on a caravan site in Portugal. And I kept doing that. So when I was on bases and I traveled around, I used to go and try and get a job in the evenings, pulling pints in a pub, because you got to meet people, different people. And so I sort of kept my 1 foot in civvy world and 1 foot in military world. So when I came out, the transition was pretty easy for me. I know a lot of people don't have that, and it's really, really challenging. Obviously, I know that a lot of ex-services personnel struggle with that transition, and it's understandable because you serve a long time. It's a lot more challenging.
Agree.
I think some of the things, you know, mixing with, getting thrown together with disparate people at different times, sharing 22-man barrack blocks. And yeah, you grow up pretty quick and you start to rely on each other. You learn to rely on each other and trust each other, obviously. And the fitness side of it, I've kept that going. You know, I loved that part of it, expedition training, kayaking, parachuting, you name it, I do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't too, it was, I saw his own stuff, like I said.
Yeah. I actually saw it. You're a big cyclist, aren't you? I've got that right?
I do a bit, yeah, I do. I'm cycling around Wales on the 16th of September, 900 miles right around the coast, down off
I saw that. How long will that take you? So is it 10 days you're doing 900 miles in?
10 days. I did John O'Groats Land's End, 1,000 miles in 9 days, 2 years ago for a children's charity. I'm doing this for a children's charity called Dreams and Wishes, which basically give the last wish of terminally ill children, which is a fantastic cause. But yeah, if we get it right, it's about 900 miles. If we get it wrong, it could be anywhere between 850 and 950 miles. So, so it's going to be an interesting. It's probably the toughest one I've picked to do so far. Yeah. Amazing.
I bet there's some hills in Wales as well, isn't there? It won't be flat.
Yeah. If they flattened out Wales, it would be bigger than England.
Yeah. So true. Yeah, so true. And sort of like talk me through that early stages, because you worked for a couple of the major house builders. What have you seen as the main differences between sort of the transitioning between the private and the public sector more recently? Like how have you found that sort of transition?
It's an interesting one, because when I left Barratt, I remember a lot of my colleagues said, "You're going to be bored in social housing." And I've said this many times, I've been perplexed, baffled and confused, but I've never been bored. It's unbelievably diverse and incredibly rewarding to be doing what we do in this sector. And, you know, everybody is driven by different motivations. But, you know, the other point I think I'd say is that housing associations are probably very misunderstood. They're very complex. Some of them are, you know, they're huge and they're so varied in what they do. Some of them very focused on development and probably made that transition to more commercial house building than others. Others of different scales. We do care, you know, we get kids off the street, teach them life skills, provide them sheltered environments, you know, provide family homes, step down homes, downsizing. You know, the breadth of it is huge. And I would say there's often a misunderstanding that they're quite bureaucratic, they're slow to do things. They're actually much more agile. A lot of the decision making in housing associations is done at the point of the customer where it's required. And the difference is the customer, I know a lot of people say customers are the key to everything. Housing associations, pretty much every decision we make a platform, it's got to be beneficial to the customer. And that's what we work on principle.
100%. I've been in the sector 12 years, and I think housing associations predominantly have evolved more than most commercial businesses. I mean, you know, certainly what helps is that a lot of the businesses we work with are looking for bringing in commercial experiences so that they upskill themselves. But you look at some of the businesses out there at the moment in the housing association world, they're doing huge scale, including yourselves, huge scale developments. They really, really are changing the script around how a housing association operates, and it's good to see. And I think, you know, COVID, for all of its bad things, I'm sure we'll come on to it, has really, really helped transform our sector a little bit as well, and give us some growth.
Yeah, the digital transformation for HAs, I think, has been significant, dramatic, and sometimes forced, as you mentioned about COVID. But overall, I think the journey for that, enabling the customer to access us easier using apps, you know, the contact center environment that we have that is really geared to get the right person to solve the customer's whatever the issue the contact is about. They're very, very much more advanced than you would think they are, strangely. And I think if you compared them to a traditional volume house builder, they're much, much more in tune with what they've got to do around that environment. The other thing, of course, is that, you know, I wanted to go back on this one. The biggest difference is we make profit because we have to make a profit, otherwise we're not a successful organization. But we make a profit and use it for social good. You know, it's profit for purpose. We basically, what we make, the rent we take, the new homes we sell, the shared ownership we sell, all that comes back into the organization to build more homes and provide services, maintenance for our customers. Whereas obviously, if you're a PLC, the profit goes back to the shareholders. And that's probably the clearest way to explain it, I guess.
It is. And I think I suppose one party's building for the customer, both parties building for the customer, but one party's really looking at community placemaking, all the things that are really important within creating a development. I think it's slightly different sometimes within a housing association, the way that their schemes are put together, the way that they put the community at the heart, green space, all the other things. But I think there's a lot of synergies now between the two, and I don't actually see as big of a difference as I probably did 10 years ago between the commercial house builders and the housing associations.
We work in partnership with the big house builders, and a lot of them do understand that you can't, when you build a new community, it's got to be sustainable. You've got to have transport infrastructure, you've got to have a community centre, a sense of place. And we work very closely with those organisations, and that enables us to do so much more.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is great. And if we fast forward to today, I suppose, give us a helicopter view of Platform as we sit here today. Just give us an overview of Platform as a business.
Right. Well, we manage 46,000 homes across what I would call the central belt of England, from the Welsh borders to the east coast, then Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire, over to Cambridgeshire, all the way to the east coast to Yorkshire, and then back across to Shropshire. So a pretty big region. And obviously we're looking to increase our development profiles. We want to get up to about 2,000 homes a year. Ultimately, our ambition is to build 12,000 homes in the next 5 years. And we provide, as I said, all those services I mentioned earlier. We construct care homes, we do mixed construction where we've got commercial space, residential. Obviously, the reason we exist, we are an affordable housing deliverer, and we build multiple 10-year sites. We do traditionally we've done about a third social rent, third affordable rent, third shared ownership. Okay. But going forward, as a means to an end, we will be doing open market sale, about 10% of our program, to enable us to compete effectively in what is a very, very competitive land market. But it allows us, we've got more flexible tenure. If you're a volume house builder, you're building houses for sale, and you sell them, you move on. Whereas we look at how we can mix the tenure to get a truly balanced community. And as you mentioned, we are involved with that community in perpetuity. So it's in our best interest to make sure that it functions effectively, and the houses are built well and the right quality and good public open space, great places to live. So we're basically going to be there for good. Yeah,
that's a really nice sentiment. And I think if you just talk us through your current development program, you said 12,000 homes over 5 years. It's ambitious. I like it. But how realistic is that from like you mentioned, some of the challenges that we're currently facing? The land is the biggest one that I can see. How are you finding that at the moment?
I'd say we're in the perfect storm at the moment, to be honest with you, James. Okay, so we can do it. We definitely can do it. We're financially capable. We announced we've established a £1.35 billion additional funding this year to increase our development program and improve our existing housing stock. However, you got Brexit. It is still a significant impact on what we do. There's no two ways about it. That's about materials delivery, materials shortages, materials price inflation. But that's been exacerbated by COVID. So we've had countries where mining has stopped, manufacturing has stopped for periods and different periods. We lost basically 3 months at the start of the financial year because of COVID. But you're seeing incredible price increases on timber, steel, polymers, slates, doors. You can be ordering doors in 6 months out at the moment. And I think, we're in a very competitive land market. We've got about 170 different schemes in either acquisition, planning, construction, or in the sales and rent process. And that's across that geography. So it's a big machine to feed with land, as you might imagine. And as I said, it's a very competitive land market, and the pricing, as we've all said, everybody expected this huge slump in prices. They're still going up. If anything, all that's happened very recently is that rate of increase has slowed down somewhat. But everybody's, what they call it, the flight for light, or the race for space, where people want to get out into the rural areas. And that has a knock-on effect on towns and villages that are outside the cities that are seeing pressure on pricing as well. So, and we're here to build affordable homes. We're going to stay doing that, and we're going to increase our development program to match the demand.
And what would you say is a typical site you'd want to procure? Is it 100 unit sites? Is there no limit to the sites that you want to procure? Is there a particular location, inner city, outer city? Like what What do you generally look for when you go and procure land?
There is no upper limit, really, because we
Okay.
want to be a lead developer. We want to do that in partnership with other organisations as well. Ultimately, we're a strategic partner of Homes England, which we're very, very proud of being part of that. And they have certain requirements that we are happy to fulfil, building in rural areas, using SMEs, using MMC. But ultimately, we're looking for 80, 100 homes per site. That's that's the ideal. But if you're doing rural infill or you're doing smaller environments, we do stuff around 20, 25 homes.
Right.
Funny enough, we've actually got sites currently we're building, 2 or 3, but that is really an exception. What we want to be doing is looking at, and we are bidding on sites that are over 1,000 homes.
Yeah, what do you do, just thinking out loud, actually, what do you do around regeneration? Is there some stuff that you do there which is just making good of some old properties as well as the sort of new stuff?
Yeah, we've recently created a new team that's led by a Regeneration director,
right.
and he's come up with a fantastic program that he calls the Ugly program, and that's the Underused Garages and Land Initiative. Catchy, very clever, I thought. And he's looking at exactly that, underused land where we've got low density stuff that is could do with invigorating estates that need a little bit of help. Maybe that the shift has changed. What does the commercial centre look like now?
Yeah.
Can we manage the stock effectively, and is it giving the right environment for our customers? If it's not, we want to work with the community and say, look, what does regeneration look like here? How can we work together to come up with a solution that improves the estate maybe, or the environment, and what we could put back there. Yeah. Another initiative is looking at all our garage sites and how we can use them more effectively as well.
Yeah, because there's so much unused land, isn't there? I mean, literally so much unused land. But I was reading something the other day, it's probably on your LinkedIn, given your status of constantly posting stuff that I see every day. But and it was saying how much percentage of land is owned by local authority and how much of it is just disused space, garages, there's all that. And there's got to be some regeneration in some of those sites. What about the heat map of where your developments currently are? Is there a heat map, or is it anywhere in that patch at all?
No, well, we have 4 criteria for our land. So we've got operating areas we're already in that are quite dense. So it's efficient for us to manage the estate, do the maintenance. Our teams haven't got a long way to travel, so we know we've got about the right density. There's areas we operate in already which are quite low density, so it's quite difficult for the teams that are out there trying to get to the customers' homes. They've got to travel long distances. So we want to intensify that. So we're looking at areas like that, particularly. In all honesty, in our whole patch, we'll look at any land that comes forward if it's an opportunity. And then we've got areas we want to move into, like the southwest of England, where we don't have any stock at all. So we're looking at large-scale schemes down towards Bristol. Yep. Oxford City, we got stock around Oxfordshire, but not in Oxford City, which is another strange thing. Cambridgeshire, all over, pretty much anywhere between the north and south and east and west.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my head's ticking over, thinking, how do you even assess so many sites? Because I'm presuming you've got a good profile at Platform, definitely, and people know you're building. And I think I read in Inside Housing that you're in the top 10, aren't you, of developments? So clearly people will throw sites at you all day long and say, we're looking at this. How do you even just rationalize what there is out there and make your decision on what's a good piece of land and what's not a good pice of land?
Well, we got good land people. I employ really good land people. That's my rule. I employ good people and get out of the way. That's an old saying, I know, but it's very true. So you land people, they've got existing networks. I've got existing networks. You draw upon that. People, as you say, they see that you're out there. We've raised our profile significantly in the land market over the past year. But then, do you know what? You can even be driving around. I drive around and I spotted a garden centre that was shut down the other day, put that into the land team and said, hey, why don't you have a look at that? And it turns out, and interestingly, I've done it before asking colleagues. We've got 1,500 colleagues driving around the country. And I said, if you ever see a parcel of land that looks like you could build on it, give the land team a shout and we'll take a look. But there's lots of other stuff. There's software that does very good searches that you can utilise, not naming any brands, but they're out there, AI stuff that, can say, we've looked at this area, we've scoped it, there's previous planning consent. We get people come to us, landowners, directly and say, look, I've got a piece of land, what do you think? We get package deals where people come, they've got control of a piece of land and say, look, we want to build it out for you, what do you think? But we really want to move to a more land-led delivery mechanism where we buy the land, we tender with main contractors, and ultimately we'd like to find a way to self-deliver, build a house building capability within the organisation.
Yeah, well, it was my next point, actually. I was going to say, you talked earlier about collaboration. I think the one major factor that has improved in the last 10 years that I've seen is house builders and housing associations working in collaboration much more freely than they ever have previously. But how do you go around selecting partners to build out your programs? And, well, you mentioned it just now. Is there any, I suppose, appetite for you to build out some of your own properties over time?
Without doubt, I think the collaborative nature of what we do is essential, and not just with other private developers, but other housing associations as well, because we've got a lot of financial capability in housing associations. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of very good, skilled people in housing associations that understand how it all works. Realistically, we want to work with organisations who have values that align with ours, that genuinely want to do good. And again, I'm not mentioning any names. You do have some organisations that are far more commercially focused and really do look for that return on investment back to the investors. However, there are a lot of organisations that realise to do things right, working in collaboration with housing associations can really unlock some great opportunities. So that's the big part of that. Yeah. And yes, I've done it before. I've set up a private house building subsidiary for a housing association that was very successful and is still going very well indeed. But for us, one of the greatest values about building a house building capability is the social good we can do with it. We can get people into skills and training and apprentices. We've got a great apprenticeship program as it is. Yeah. But to be able to get people into employment and customers, who live near our sites, get them into some kind 100%. Of technical training. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's one of the best things I've ever seen in the sector is just being able to create skills and jobs and opportunity for those that haven't been given an opportunity previously. And I think housing associations do a great job at that. What's your opinion, though? Because one thing that I see, and obviously the role that I do, is I'm seeing less and less people go to university for housing related or degrees within our sector, and therefore I see that in 5 to 10 years there's going to be a shortage of skills, which there already is in land, as we've talked about. How do we inspire that next generation of talent to come through in the industry, would you say? What's the best thing we can do to really raise the profile? Because there's so many people looking at tech now and other sectors. Housing just seems to be something people fall into. We need to make it a career of choice and change that perception, in my opinion.
It's really interesting. I think there's again this misunderstanding about what happens, and the scale of opportunities in housing and house building is huge. Lawyers, you've got the finance teams, you've got data managers, you've got IT. I mean, there's pretty much. I couldn't imagine if you're a youngster looking at housing associations, the amount of opportunity there is unbelievable. I think the key for it is all people like myself and other people in the sector is getting out there and promoting it, showing people what we do, introducing youngsters to it, going into colleges and schools and saying, look, this is a career of choice for many people. Yeah. And as I said, I think working with people to look at the modern apprentices, we've got apprentices across the whole organisation, and it's great. And they're not just on site. But I do take your point. You're basically building the most expensive handmade thing anybody'd ever buy in a field in the snow, rain, and mud.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And I've worked and lived on construction sites for many years, and freezing cold and rain, and you feel sorry for yourself in the winter, then you're cooking in the summer. It's one of those things. However, I think the way in which the industry is transforming itself now and starting to look at how we can build things in factories, modular housing. Yep. And believe me, I bet if you asked a plumber, would you like to be in a nice warm factory with a cafeteria down a corridor, or be stood up to your knees in mud in a field trying to get to a built site? I know where I think that.
100%, yeah.
I think that's the sort of transition which I think is going to make a step change in terms of skills. And we have got a skill shortage across the board, not just on site.
We have, and it's typically at a lower level, if I'm honest, as well. Like, I'm seeing less people join land teams. I'm seeing less people become land apprentices, graduates. So it's just, we've got to take care of that. Otherwise, our sector's got a bit of a danger coming in 5-10 years. But what about, you mentioned modular. It's been a big focus of our podcast so far. We've had the likes of Tom Bloxham and Dave Sheridan on the podcast. What's your view on modular? Is it here to stay? I've seen that you've posted a lot of stuff on your social media. What's your actual view? Is it something we can get to genuine scale or not?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it absolutely is. And I think the key to that is working, again, collaboratively with the organizations, because some of them are startups and they need a surety of pipeline so that they can get their supply chain sorted out. And we have that pipeline, and a lot of housing associations have significant development programs that can do that. For future proofing, if you think about it, so something like COVID, if you're building in a factory in a controlled environment, it's easier to control the health and safety and the well-being of your colleagues. Absolutely. And I think that's one big step change. I think a lot of people, and I've used this term a couple of times, is they're nervous about buying Betamax, not VHS. And I know you're young, so it might not quite land. So maybe DVD and Blu-ray, I don't know. But anyway, the comparison is everybody wants to buy the bit that's going to stay and be in perpetuity. Interestingly, modular build and prefabricated stuff's been around for years and years and years. A lot of the Cornish units post Second World War were factory-based or concrete frame bolted together stuff that's still being used and probably not fit for purpose in many places. Yeah. However, the stuff that I'm seeing in factories being constructed now is more attuned to proper manufacturing, very high quality, and ultimately the benefits are you get people into a house quicker, so you're housing your customers quicker. Mm-hmm. You're providing, and a lot of them are very, very efficient. You say it's £3.50 a day to heat, light, and power a 3-bed traditional semi. It could be as low as 50 pence a day in an MMC factory podded built unit, and that's not exaggeration. That's and for the customer, that's fuel poverty is a very significant issue for a lot of our customers. But to do that and reduce their heating costs, it makes a massive difference.
It does make a difference, and it's interesting because Ilka have just launched Ilka Zero, which is one of their products, and it's all about actually forget how carbon neutral the house is to build. It's about actually zero bills for the customer, and I mean, I feel like we're getting close to that anyway. You look at electric cars and where that's transitioned to recently. People are full chargers at £3 on their electric meter versus a tank of petrol at 100 quid. So I do think we're going to get there. I just wonder with the MMC model, when I speak to the guys that are developers in that sector, they say a lot of the housing associations want to do pilots and they want to do 5 units, 10 units. They want to try the product. They need scale, don't they? And we've got to work collaboratively together to be able to give them that scale so that we can get the price down per unit. Because I don't think the product works in the north, as far as I can tell at the moment, in terms of a cost per unit anyway, or per home.
Yeah, that's an interesting dilemma because it does cost more in many of the MMC solutions that you have available to you. However, it's what is the other, you can measure it in terms of return on capital employed, what's your operating margin, all that stuff, right? And you can churn out the financials and you can tick all the boxes, but it's the qualitative stuff, like I mentioned, a quicker home for the customer, less disruption in the community because you're on site for less time. Yeah. You get your rent in quicker. That's another way of looking at it. And that's a financial metric, I know. But ultimately, if it's doing the right thing for the customer, it's providing them with a house that's cheap to run, with lower fuel bills, there's got to be added benefit in the long-term social benefit and purpose of the organisation. So is it all about pennies or is it about quality?
It's going to be, for me, it's a mix, but clearly the quality should come before the financials. However, it's easy for me to say that. I'm not the guy buying the units, so it's easy for me to say.
Let me caveat that. My finance director would be frowning at me across the table. Yeah. You've still got to have a successful and financially resilient business. So you've got to make it stack up. However, I think you do have to weigh in what is the benefit for the customer as well, and for us, long-term maintenance. Does the product, is it the right quality? Do you have fewer snags? Yeah. Do you mess your customer around less? And there's a raft of stuff you have to look at. So it's exciting times.
I agree. Want to take you up on 2 points there. One is that you call me a youngster, so thanks for that. That's the first time someone said that for 10 years. The second thing is I'd imagine that your inbox is going to be full of MMC contractors now saying, here, this is 20% above market value. But let's see how that plays on.
Yeah, well, in fairness, they aren't shy in coming forward.
And in terms of your journey, platform's journey around zero carbon, where are you up to on your current journey within your developments around that journey?
Well, we're currently benchmarking our carbon footprint basically now, so that we can be very clear about what we're doing in future.
Mm-hmm.
But our ambition is to look at how we can significantly reduce the carbon footprint of our construction program with our partners and developers. And it's not just about the construction on site, as you well know. It's about where does the materials and supply chain come from? What's the embedded cost of carbon that we've transporting things long distances? We've got a big footprint with a lot of manufacturing that goes on in the middle of it. You know, you want to avoid flying stuff from China. Well, not least because of all the issues we're just going through now with Brexit and border control and the rest of it. But, you know, if you're working with MMC providers, for example, that operate in the West Midlands, you know, use them. If we got it in the north of our patch, let's look at how we can do that. You're actually reducing that. So as an organization, you know, from our social purpose and how we treat the environment, we're looking at it across the board, our maintenance functions, our general day-to-day transitions, everything that we do and every interaction we have, we're starting to measure now exactly what that cost is for carbon, and our ambition is to accelerate our reduction as quickly as we can.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've got two trails of thought on this. One is there's a lot of companies now offsetting, and I appreciate that is a contribution to carbon. I think there also needs to be a reduction, in my opinion. We can't just keep offsetting everything. Whilst it's beneficial, we've got to try and find ways to build less, more efficiently, haven't we, and more sustainably, because even products, you know, the MMC, again, going back to the MMC point, the timber's becoming manufactured and produced more sustainably, which effectively brings down the carbon footprint. And that's what the stuff that I want to start looking at is, rather than just offset, which a lot of companies are doing, is how can we reduce actually what carbon footprint we're using? Like you say, using Chinese manufacturers and all these different products can genuinely accelerate that carbon footprint quite dramatically, I found. It's where you source your materials from.
And again, we come back to that point that if you're working with organizations and give them a surety of the pipeline, that they know they're going to get work, they can order things in, they can bulk buy stuff that they know they're going to go through. So they can actually look and plan about how they're going to transfer materials, where they're going to buy it from. And the whole supply chain or the value chain then is benefiting from having a resilient pipeline of work that they can commit to and buy things in. You know, if you're looking at 6 months to get front door sets at the moment for some organizations, you know, it's madness. It is. And again, hopefully it will inspire and trigger a manufacturing growth in the UK that sadly have probably been underinvested at a high level for some years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, I'm noticing a lot of companies now starting to look at the full life cycle of a home rather than just look at how much does it cost us today, day one. And I think the asset departments within housing associations have become much, much clearer around what that life cycle cost is. And actually, we're looking at the value of a product in the right way rather than just how much it costs. Like, value and cost for me are two different things. And clearly, asset management departments across the country now are getting very, very smart around how they look at life cycle costs of a full unit, which is great. We touched on COVID, and obviously bar the terrible sort of health problems that the country suffered, how has it affected you, platform, your developments? What's been the main challenges you've faced in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it to you before we came on the call that I joined it 1 month ago during pretty much full lockdown. And I didn't meet any of my executive colleagues for 3 months, which is quite a strange scenario. And then recruited my directors again, having not met them face to face. And I know the challenges that brings with it. Platform are a very agile organization anyway. The executive team, for example, were home-based before COVID, and many of our colleagues have agile working solutions that work for them. I think we've been very proactive. Housing associations, again, were so quick off the mark to get solutions in place and to get support. And that's the other thing, is the amount of support that housing associations provide for their colleagues. You know, it's very supportive and trying to find a solution that works for people. And one of the things we're finding, the attraction into our organization, and it's pushed from other organizations and pulls into our organization, is our agile working solutions and the way in which we are happy to find a way to work with people. Well, let's face it, there are roles that have to be out there and available. So maintenance teams, neighborhood support teams, they have to be out there, and they do a fantastic job and have done all the way through. And a huge amount of respect for what they've done during a very challenging time. But I think from our perspective, development is remote agile. We don't build houses in the office. They're built in a field or in a brownfield site in a city centre. So my teams have been out on the road. I've been on the road pretty much every week since last July. We're starting to do more face-to-face stuff now, which is great. And because you can't buy land unless you go and see it. So I genuinely think if you're going to buy a piece of land, you should go and see it first. And I think the other point is that, there's nothing like getting around the plan of a site and having a look at it and saying that plot could be turned a bit and get a south-facing garden. We could get a garage in there. Public open space is a bit small. Let's see how we can tweak that. There's always a part of that. The collaborative working, and I think the other point is, of course, the support. A lot of people rely on work for their pastoral care to some extent, but certainly their engagement with the organisation and meeting people and that. And the other thing is, of course, some of our colleagues have been at home looking after very young children, trying to juggle the job. So again, we look at ways and how we can support that, and that's great. The platform, that was one of the great things about what attracted me to the platform very early on, is the way in which they focus on how they can make things work for people and make it work for the customer and the colleagues, which is great.
And have you had any challenges with that in terms of recruiting people remotely? I mean, it's transformed our business, so I presume it's transformed yours, but the ability to not have to. I remember back in my early career going out to the motorway services, meeting people for an hour, and it was just a massive waste of everyone's time, because whilst you get slightly better engagement face to face, I still believe that. I still think there was a lot of wasted time, people traveling to and from meetings that they didn't need to travel for. But have you seen any challenges in just the integration, induction, getting people up to speed within the remote working world or agile working?
I know there's been challenges, but I would say that platform were geared up. I basically, I was recruited by the board, and they pretty much said, "Can you start next Monday?" My laptop, my screen turned up on a Friday afternoon, plugged it all in, and I went from day one. So the challenges going forward, I think you're right. There's a lot of non-verbal clues when you're in a meeting, and sometimes I've been in board meetings where you've got 12 or 14 people on the screen, and as a chair or somebody's trying to get something out of a meeting, not picking up on those non-verbal clues is really hard in this scenario. One-to-one, fantastic. Small groups, brilliant. The bigger the group, the more interaction you want, the harder it is to read, and people do struggle sometimes to get in at the right time. You'll see people put their hands up, the little yellow hand come up in the box, and they can't get in, and by the time they get in, we've moved on to a different subject. And I think that's a big part to play in it. So I think there will be a part to play, very much so, for certain functions, certain behaviors that have to be matched to group challenge, critique, stuff like that. But definitely, you're right. Driving up the motorway to meet somebody for a face-to-face interview that could be done like this, it's a waste of time.
It is a waste of time. The bit that I've got a challenge on agile work, and it's only a small challenge, is how we integrate the next generation of talent. When we're trying to upskill young people that want to be in an office and want to have camaraderie and they need other people around them to learn, I think we'll struggle sometimes. And we've got to think about how we work with that. But it's a small thing, in my opinion, for such a massive benefit of being able to work agile now.
There's a huge benefit, and you're right. People, I know it's many young people. I know personally family members who have come out of university, started a job, and really, really struggle. Because I started during lockdown. I'm at a point in my career where I should really know what I'm doing. And I know if I need to speak to somebody, I can phone the finance team. I'm not worried about phoning the finance team and saying, "Who do I need to speak to about this?" If you're a youngster coming into an organisation, you don't know how the structures work. You don't know who in finance does payroll necessarily, or you've got a problem, you want to speak to HR. I mean, they are brilliant, and platform are fantastic about it. But a lot of organisations, the induction and onboarding, as they call it now, is it really going to be fit for purpose going on? And it's those sat around in the office. You can turn to the person next to you and say, "Oh, do you know, where would this be? How do I find that? How do I put my mileage claim in?" Anything like that. You're not going to know as a new starter. So I'm certainly very much in tune with you on that, and I think that is something we've got to face and look at, how we can bring people along and train them and develop them in organisations. Yeah,
I agree totally. And as we, I suppose, look to the future, we've talked about the growth plans, but What do you see of the future of our sector? We're miles behind the government target of 300,000 homes, aren't we? I mean, miles behind. I'm not so sure it was ever realistic in the first place. However, what do you think the barriers for us now are in order to achieve the targets that were being set as a country? Because I mean, we've got a huge problem. I don't know about where you live, but where I live in Manchester, I'm forever trying to deal with organisations to tackle homelessness. It is a huge problem in our city, and it's a huge problem in our city because of gentrification and people being pushed out of the inner city. And I think for me, we've got a big job to play here in making sure we can house everybody that wants to be housed, and we can't do that at the moment as a country. But what do you see the main barriers to that at this stage, at this moment in time?
Well, there's a raft of them. It's no single solution, and I think that one of the biggest challenges, obviously, is that land is always a challenging environment to be buying, and it's highly competitive. It's not like for like. We're buying land to build affordable homes, so our margins are much slimmer than a volume house builders would be, and that's the way it is. It's the way they're set up. They build higher density. They build for significant profit. We're building to try and build sustainable communities that fit for purpose. The planning, every changing planning that I've witnessed that was supposed to speed it up has only ever managed to slow it down.
Agree.
And I know that people will be ranting in the background and saying, "Oh, it's not just planning." Planners are under-resourced in local authorities. The process is painfully slow, unbelievably restrictive. If you want to join this sector as an SME, say you go out and buy £5 million worth of land, that's cash out the door and interest payments going on day one, right?
Yeah.
3 years down the line, you might be lucky enough to be building and selling homes and getting a profit in. So how can you break into a sector? And SMEs have been absolutely decimated since 2007, 2008. And a lot of regional SMEs now, I know, are struggling very much with their cash.
Same.
And I think that is always going to be a problem. And how we can, we're looking to how we can support regional developers. And again, we've got to talk to them. We've got to understand what their pressures are, how we can help them out. Collaboration, as I mentioned to you, working with the private sector to unlock opportunities, working with other housing associations to look at larger sites that we can actually deliver large scale, because it's inefficient to be looking at these small sites all the time. It takes almost as much, well, it takes as much time and effort to do a site of about 40 homes as it does 140. It takes long to build it, I'll give you that. But however, to get it across the line, the planning, the consultation, the ecology, the ground investigations, getting your sections, section agreements signed off. Highways officers in many areas are few and far between, so you get delays because of that. And you've got opposition, that's the other thing. Don't forget the opposition, people who oppose the schemes that can make it drag on and drag on and drag on. NIMBYism is a very real problem in the country, and I think that, again, and interestingly, quite often the NIMBYs that oppose me on sites are often the first people in the queue to buy a house for their daughter or their son.
Yeah, it's funny.
They don't have to get pushed out the area.
That's so true. And do you know what's funny as well is every time I say where are the challenges in the market, it doesn't take more than 5 seconds for someone to mention planning, to be honest. But it's
not the planners. It's not the planners themselves.
No, I get that.
A lot of it's the process and the lack of resource.
But what could we do if you was in charge of planning in the UK today? What would you honestly change? Like, how do we make it smoother? Because when I spoke to Tom on the first podcast that we did, and he said that it used to cost 50k to do a site of 150 units. It now costs 500k and takes 10 times longer. It's true, isn't it? It has become absolutely impossible to build quickly, and we actually need to build quicker than ever. But what would you do to fix that if you had a controlling arm?
Genuinely having presumed consent in areas where it's going to be residential, you're going to build it, it's coming. That's the way it is.
Fine.
I think that the process, if you're going to build and deliver your obligations under Section 106, for example, affordable housing, and you're not going to go challenge on viability, you get a fast track through the planning process and you get your consent quicker. Yeah. If you're going to start arguing about viability and we want to put fewer affordable homes on there and we don't want to contribute to the highways, we don't want to build the school, you want to, tough luck, you're going to go through a longer process because you're going to contest it. If you are going to fast track planning, fast track presumed consent sites quicker, where you're not going to argue about viability. And I think that's a very easy one to do. And resourcing, I think local authorities, government needs to look at local authorities provision, look at maybe revamping that entirely. I also think, and this may be a little bit controversial, development committees with councillors on are driven by political desire quite often.
Yep,
and I think
of course.
You'll notice that planning consents coming up to a local election or ward elections can be affected by that, and that's because they're very local people doing a great job for their communities. However, they're human and they get pressured about things like NIMBYism, and that'll affect them, and maybe not make the right decision about whether it should be new housing. So I think that personally, quite radical, planning committees and local authorities need to take it. We need to look at that and how we can improve it, and have professional people looking at it and saying, is it right for the community? Is it the right thing? And again, this thing about aesthetics, whether or not you like it, sometimes some of the, it's pretty straightforward. We're building houses, it's not rocket science.
Well, and this whole has to fit in with the local environment thing has changed. Like, people don't want the same thing over and over and over again. They want the variety of schemes and all that sort of stuff. And a final word on land. What could we do to fix the land situation in the country? Is there anything the government could do to fix that, do you think? Like open up more sites, make greenfield more available? Like what could we do to accelerate our growth of the housing sector, do you think?
Well, greenfield is one thing. But I'm not necessarily advocating just going out and building on greenfield.
Of course.
Green belt, by the way, is a different matter. I think the green belts need to be reviewed to get a proper analysis of, are green belts fit for purpose? And they're not necessarily greenfield, remember? There is that a big distinction, and people get muddled up. And I think it puts artificial pressure on land in and around cities that have a green belt. And we need to look at that, definitely. I think that when land is coming to market, it's local authority or government, it should be what's right, not the most pound per square foot, for example. What is the best solution for this environment? Not, can we sell it to the highest bidder? Because if every time it's the highest bidder, you're going to get higher density, you may not get the best communal space, defensible public open space, good sized gardens, safe parking environments, great places for the youngsters to play, access to employment, somewhere you can walk to the shop, cycle infrastructure, alternative infrastructure. And I think that you need to look at that holistically and not just about the pounds per square foot returned into government coffers. Yeah,
no, it's all good points. And I think everyone's, interestingly, everybody says the same things. And it's just, do you think they'll ever happen? I mean, in your opinion, do you think we'll ever get there in some of these areas? Or do you think there will be any radical change in the next 5-6 years?
I hope there will be. And I'd love to say that I'm very confident there will be. I think we've got a continued battle. And I think that housing associations have got a big part to play in lobbying local and national government to do the things we keep suggesting, and looking at solutions, speaking to people like housing associations that understand the real challenges, that can influence change, that do make policy decisions, that can make and ultimately for the customer. And like you said, 300,000 homes a year is just not achievable with the current situation and the way it's set up. It's just not going to happen.
No, and it's going to get, we're going to get further and further and further behind as well, aren't we? I mean, every year the target gets bigger, and I just don't see, unless there's a radical shake-up of some of the processes that are in, that I don't think it's a resource. I think we need to sort the resource problem out in planning offices. I get that. But I actually think the process needs to change to make it more affable to contractors and housing associations and developers to say, do you know what? Like, actually, go and build. We want you to build, go and build, and we're going to make it a lot easier for you to get there.
Yeah, well, if you look genuinely, if it's 2 to 3 years to start building on a site after you've done all the other stuff you've got to do before you get a penny back for your investment. Yeah. If you told somebody, right, you can now buy that, and I guarantee you'll be building on it in 8 months' time.
Oh,
or 10 months.
Different situation. Yeah, totally different situation. And just one way to wrap up. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but and I'm sure we'll do a follow-up of where platform get to in the next 10 years. But just give us a final word on the housing sector. What do you hope for? It doesn't have to be in development, but what do you hope for our sector in the next 2 or 3 years? What would be your absolute wish for the sector?
I'd like to be able to sit back and say that house prices are realistic. and people can actually afford to buy them, because the differential between income and the average price of a home now is just eye-watering. You know, to be able to say that we build houses to house people, not as investments. And I know we look at around us, and that is the way it is. It's a very strange environment where we got a large part of the country hoping for house prices to go up, 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 and all the first-time buyers and young people going, "Oh, please come down, please come." You know, with the days of 3 times your salary for the average house price,
no chance.
It's more like 8 to 10 to 12 in some areas, or even higher. And even if it's 6, it's completely unaffordable. I'd like the housing sector to be a major contributor and compete actively, and be able to compete actively, and genuinely see affordable housing in the broader sense being built across the whole of the country.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
And you, James. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Take care.